the Mayn Idea Podcast.
Excellent. So you've performed oxygen-assisted high-altitude skydives above 15,000 feet. You've dove the Britannic at over 120 meters, and you served your country on land, which puts you in a very unique group of people that have spent a significant amount of time becoming proficient at being in these three different zones. And so I have to ask you, when did you realize that you were not going to live an ordinary life?
Well, a couple of things. I think one is normality is relative. So both, I don't know, internally, like my life is my life, so it's normal to me. But also, it's relative to the people you surround yourself with. So, because I know guys who are like top level world class cave divers and stuntmen and skydivers, that's the people I kind of hang around with. I'm not sure that's a good or bad thing, but so the stuff that I do is perfectly normal because it is pretty standard to compared to them. I remember I was in a unit once in the forces where it was basically half paras and half commandos, like half Royal Marine Command, like commandos and half like airborne, like I suppose you sort of version of Rangers. Just a lot of kind of both camaraderie, but kind of competition between the two groups, especially when it came to fitness. So they were all super fit, and I was all right. I was probably above average on that. I was like sort of out of 100 guys, maybe 70th fitness wise. But if you'd asked me at the time, how fit are you? I would have said, "Oh, I'm about average fitness," because in that group of people, I was about average. But I wasn't. I was like super fit because I'm in this. But the normality for me was that I am just an average person, average right. Fitness level in this group. So yeah, I think there's that. I think you have to, I suppose, be a bit aware of who you're surrounded by, but also as far as when I knew I wouldn't lead a perhaps less standard life, I don't think I've ever known that, and I still don't, in the sense that it's the choices you make. And you've got to actively make those choices, and you've got to work for it. So it's not like I think I've chosen to lead alternatives, and I mean the forces. I joined the force at a young age, and I think you're already leading a slightly different world outside society anyway. So leaving the forces and effectively transitioning into another slightly unorthodox lifestyle wasn't as difficult as perhaps somebody who'd come from a different background.
Was there always a calling to that, to serve or to go into that line of, it seems like adventure is the theme in all aspects of your life, be that, serving your country or diving or skydiving. What was it that drew you towards enlisting?
Well, yeah, I think there's probably two driving forces. One was definitely the adventure. One was a bit more practical. So myself and my brother joined the force as well. In fact, he's still in. He's been in, oh my God, he's been in like 25 years or something. No more than that. He's been in 30 years now. But we came from a sort of rural Scottish background. So my mother's side were sort of farm workers and my father's side were coal miners. So, a way of getting out of that and perhaps earning a bit of money and seeing the world was to join the forces. That was kind of one of the ways out. But also, me and my brother, typical young boys in the 80s, grew up, reading Commando comic and playing soldiers out in the forest. And again, a way, probably the only way really that certainly was open to us or that we could see, if you wanted to see the world and have adventures, was to join the forces. I mean, this is the days before, before Instagram or Facebook or social media any way, and even way before the internet. So we weren't exposed to any alternatives. If you were a young lad in the 80s in the UK and from sort of a working class background and you wanted to, travel the world and have adventures, you joined the forces. That's kind of what you did. So yeah, I think it was both that seeking kind of, global adventures, but also a practical one of I need to get a job and earn some money.
I think I really appreciate that. It's interesting with the rise of social media and how much voyeurism there is in viewing other people's activity, what they're doing and their adventure. And there really was something special about doing things because you wanted to do them, or because that's what you knew you could do without being influenced by other factors. Yeah, I think about like growing up skiing. There was no way to share skiing. I loved doing it. I loved competing in it. I loved training for it. I loved the fitness aspect, but I wasn't, social media didn't exist yet. So there was no way to see the measuring stick of kind of where you were. And so it felt very organic. Not that there's not ways to have that organic experience today, but it does seem a lot different.
Yeah, I don't want to say harken back to the good old days, it's like with rose tinted
so easy
spectacles.
To do that.
Yeah, but part of how I earn my living is from sponsorship and that sort of stuff. So I have to maintain a presence on social media. I've stripped into one. I'm on Instagram and that's it. Well, actually, I'm on Facebook, but it cross posts. So I can only deal with one social media thing at a time. And even then, I'm not on it that often. And I've got some friends who, they're professional stuntmen, and they're not on any social media at all. And so I'm quite envious of the lack of distraction and the lack of kind of focus that pulls away. But also, we have to be, I think, very aware of not doing, of forgetting to kind of acknowledge the thing we are doing, because we're so busy recording it for somebody else.
Right.
I'm getting from the social media point of view. I remember my agent. I was skydiving. I'm still getting a bit sporadic, but often I was skydiving all day, and she went, "Oh my God, well, why weren't you posting on social media?" So I said, "Oh, she was, what are you up to?" I've been skydiving all day with my mates. Why have you been posting it on social media? Because I've been busy skydiving with my mates.
Right.
I was like, it's taking time out of the thing to post the thing. It's like you're missing what the important part is. And there is this prevalence of, if it's not on social media, it didn't happen type of thing.
Right.
But by the same token, somebody grown up now, if they want to travel the world and have adventures, they're suddenly exposed to all these things that would never have occurred to me.
Right.
Not only new jobs, but like photographers and journalists and, professional guides and all this sort of world that I could have done. And those jobs existed when I was young, but it would never have occurred to me because it was so far removed from my world and the world that I had any connection with. However, on the flip side of that is that I think we've got to be very aware that not just all media is a slightly dressed version of the truth. And even mine, I keep saying this to people. I said, look, this is not my life. This is the short window. So, you're seeing the best bits. It's not untrue. It's absolutely true. Everything I put on social media is absolutely, there's no Photoshop. It's all 100% true. But it's the best bits, not
totally
the whole truth, and I've had people at shows go, I'd love to do what you do. Yeah, great. It is cool. But as long as you understand, I don't spend 7 days a week jumping out of planes and cave diving. I will say if there's a bar chart of my time, the two things vying for the highest slot on that graph is time sat behind a steering wheel or sat behind a laptop, and that's the reality. So it's actually no different from most people's lives like that. And it's a lot like still being in the forces. People assume you just spend your days jumping out of helicopters and shooting rifles or whatever, blowing things up. And you do get to do that sometimes. There's an awful lot of sitting around doing nothing. Even on operational tours, you spend most of the time sitting around doing nothing, waiting for something to happen. So I was talking
recently to a buddy of mine at jiu-jitsu, and he's in special forces here, and he was talking about being on it's one type of mission. I don't remember what he called it, but he was saying for 8 hours they are stationed in one vehicle, doing like reconnaissance for this area.
Yeah.
And he's like, you're going to the bathroom and water jugs, five guys in a car for 8 hours waiting to do something that you may not even get the opportunity. You may have to change location. You may get new intel that you have to move around. And I'm like, that's so interesting, because your perception of what, in that case, my perception of what they did is that they're Rambo, right? They're just jumping out of planes, taking the bad guy, saving people. And here they are sitting in a car in some humid, hot city for 8 hours straight without being able to move. And, you bring up an interesting point about the social media thing is really interesting. I talk about this a lot, especially with clients. Like, you're always seeing the end result. You're bombarded constantly with the end result, the fastest mile, the highest jump, the steepest mountain, the deepest dive, like whatever that is. It's not, people don't show the not so great parts because it's not exciting. It won't get good traction. People won't share it. So if you look at someone's page, which is really a representation of how they view themselves or how their management views them or whatever, it's a very odd view of the way that they are. And there's an entire person and a life and a family and things behind that that you don't get to experience when you're just viewing it for that one snapshot.
Yeah, it's and sometimes I think it's misleading, and I try and make the point, mostly in the text, because, putting up photographs of me sat at a laptop doing Excel spreadsheets or booking flights and that, people are like, this is boring. Yeah, I know it's boring. We just put up pictures that are going to inspire us, or at least like make our day a little bit brighter. Like, okay, I get that. So often in text below, like, here's a picture of me cave diving in France. However, to get to this point was weeks of, buying kit, sorting kit out, packing kit, going through kit, making like kit lists, booking ferries, booking hotel, all that, like expeditions, adventure projects, all these sort of things. It's akin to making a movie. What we see at the end is the end 2 hours or more like 3 hours these days. It tends to be, and it looks amazing. You go, yeah, it's cool. But there's lots of people making lunch and fixing lights and building scaffolding, and there's all the kind of nuts and bolts behind the scenes and much like this. But it's like, okay, I'm showing the best bits, but bear in mind, you're right, we don't just jump off a plane. There's a lot to get to that point, and actually more to your point about people just want to go to the next, the biggest, the fastest, and often there's a mentality of quick fixes, and and again, I do try and mention this on social media when I do anything to do with like sort of health and fitness. It's like, but it's actually the same with anything. Be it if you're trying to get a new skill, or if you're out on an expedition, again, the expedition doesn't happen in those 2 weeks. It's the months and months and months of build up, and the fact that it's frustrating, but that doesn't sell. Like, if you try and say to somebody, right, I will get you in great shape, in great health, and great fitness with this 12-month program. No one wants to buy it.
No, they want 20-minute abs. They want fat loss in one day.
They want 6 weeks to beach body. It's like, okay, you want 6 weeks to beach body? Cool. Start 40 weeks ago. That's the kind of reality. People don't hear that. You're going, well, if somebody's telling that you can go from nothing to super fit in a month, it's snake oil. Well,
I'm sure too with your lifestyle and your career and the things that you're exposed to, especially the risk factors involved with a lot of the expeditions that you do. If you come in contact with someone and say, hey, Andy, I really want to get into deep sea diving. You're like, you're seeing the Cave of Skulls video. You're not seeing the entire lifetime spent from 5 years old snorkeling to scuba diving to how many thousands of hours you've poured into this, to where so much of it, so many aspects are autonomous, or maybe even the way that you've conditioned your mindset to consider risk, to take into account fear, your instincts, all these kind of things that play into being able to even do something like that in the first place. Where someone looking to that going, I've scuba dived a couple times, I could probably do a pretty risky expedition. There's so much that goes into being an expert, and you are an expert in the field. But there's no way to show, unless someone's willing to go and do like a deep dive and really learn about who you are and your journey and everything. It's hard to get that understanding when you just get that one snapshot of where someone's at.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like when you said there, people message go, I want to, join your next trip or whatever it is. I get those. I smile at myself because I get these all the time. It's a bit because I don't try to be. I want to crush people. You kind of want to go. You can't. Like don't be absurd. Not being funny, but don't be absurd. Because frankly, if you were capable of it, I'd know who you are because it's not that big a community.
Right.
But, but people have said, oh, well, people say, oh, great, that's fantastic. Or how do I get in these sort of trips? And you go, well, basically, it's by invitation only. And that's not because we're elitist, but if you've put the work in and if you've got to a point where you have the ability to do these sort of projects, it's not just mine. There's like dozens of guys around the world do so. Like the guys out in Florida, the cave divers in Florida, do some incredible stuff. And down in the Yucatan as well, the American divers down there. But you'll get known if you're at that level, then people know you.
Right.
If they don't know you, you're probably not at that level. And there's ways to get there, but like you say, it's. You can't do a crash course. Right. You can't just do a crash course to be any good. You can do a crash course to learn to skydive. You can learn to skydive in 3 days. You can't learn to cave dive in 3 days, but there is, but not. You can't. It's very easy to get competent maybe at skydiving, but it's very, very, very difficult to get really good. You can be a licensed skydiver in like 17 jumps, but It can take you thousands of jumps to become an expert.
So an interesting question on that topic. I know when you did your first high altitude, you've spoken about this, and admittedly you said that you weren't quite at that level yet.
No.
That you were, in essence, it was a leap in your skill and you went for it anyway. Can you talk to me a little bit about maybe how that jump came about and some of the weighing you were doing in your head about what you were about to do?
Yeah, so I was a paratrooper in the military, and I was doing some TV presenting for the BBC, and they had this idea to this science series that involved, it was mostly like meteorology and atmospheric scientists and stuff like that, but they wanted, because it's telly, they wanted somebody to jump out of a plane at 28,000 feet over Arizona. And I was like, yeah, fantastic. And we'll train you up to that point. No, I'd only recently got my A license in skydiving, which is different from military sort of parachuting. But because
parachuting is, you have a line, right? As soon as you're out the plane, it pulls your chute and you essentially just navigate.
Yes, exactly. You don't even navigate that much because you can't really steer the round canopies that we use in the military. You pretty much just drop to the ground and take it. But I'd learned to skydive. I was a skydiver, but only a very basic one. In both the UK and the US, most systems use the same. It's an A, B, C, D. So A is beginner, B is kind of intermediate, C is a bit more handy, then D is kind of over 1,000 jumps. So you should at that point be pretty good. But I was an A licensed jumper, but we had somebody there an ex-military guy to teach me to do high altitude stuff, and it was all well and good, but the BBC said, right, you'll have weeks of training beforehand. Great, no, this is brilliant, getting paid to skydive. But because of one thing and a few problems with weather and a few problems with the BBC, we ended up having I think it was I don't know, is it 3 days? That's for 4 days. So,
Classic.
Classic. So, the training was graduated, so it's you're obviously building up, but you go and do a jump, which would be technically the hardest jump I'd ever done in my life, and you'd land, and then you go back up to do the next level up, which means for the space of 4 days, every jump was the hardest jump of my life because I was just going up one, then up one, and up one.
What makes that difficult? Because if I'm just thinking about this I've gone skydiving one time. It was a tandem jump out the plane. I'm doing nothing other than having the time of my life. Someone else pulls the chute. When you're adding altitude to your jump, what about that addition creates more difficulty?
Well, I mean, it's funny. Like if I was to do it now, I wouldn't bat an eyelid. I've done far, far harder jumps now than that. But so jumping from altitude, you've got a couple of things. One is that the air is much thinner, so your acceleration is much greater, and you accelerate at greater speeds because the drag's less, because there's physically less kind of molecules of gas around you slowing you down. And the problem with we're doing a high altitude, high opening jump. So the idea is to get out of the plane and you open your parachute straight away. If you're too slow, you pick up too much speed. And then if you open your parachute and you're going too fast, basically the opening shock is going to be, you're going to get rattled. Could injure you. Yeah. Right. In fact, people have been killed by it. had like the aorta from their heart rip away from the wall of their chest, and they've let out. But so a normal parachute is designed to open about 120 miles an hour. So if you're doing faster speeds than that, then the risk increases of a serious injury or death. The other thing is, because the air is thinner, it's actually harder to get stable when you exit the plane. And obviously you want to open stable, otherwise your parachute twists up. But, and more than anything else, the amount of equipment you've got to use is much, much colder at altitude. So you've got a big, thick suit on, big, thick gloves, all that sort of stuff. But also oxygen. You've got a big, steel oxygen cylinder strapped to your chest with a wire, with a hose coming up and an oxygen mask, the old sort of fighter pilot helmet almost. Right. With another sort of metal plate attached to your chest, which is your navigation board with your GPS and your compass and all that sort of stuff, filming equipment. So again, the stuff I've done recently, the stunts I've done in the last 12 months, doing all that, I believe brilliant fun. I mean, great crack. But at the time, I was way, way, way outside my comfort zone of all this extra kit, all these extra problems, which, a more experienced skydiver would just roll it with me a problem. But it's a bit like passing your driving test and then somebody giving you a Formula One car to drive. So you can't drive a car. It's just this is a bit of a step up.
Right.
However, I understood the risks and the problems and what I could do to sort it out. I also knew that if I got on the plane and it was all going really, really badly wrong, as much as the pressure was on me for this filming, I would just drop away. So obviously they need the footage, but so if I got the plane and I was like, I can't get stable, right? I've got pulled in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm still not stable. Thinking that's been 6, been 7, been 8, 9, 10 seconds. If I'd just gone, right, forget that, I will just carry on free fall all the way down to sort of 5,000 feet where I'm nice and stable, and I'll pull my parachute. But the shoot would have been completely over.
Right.
But that's fine. I don't mind that. Like, a lot of people feel the pressure, which, I do a little bit, I quite enjoy a little bit of pressure, but I can keep things in perspective. So when I was in the forces, we did some stuff which, frankly, was of a nature where you had to risk either your life or that of people you were working alongside. That was just what was called for. But even the forces, those are very, very rare occasions. And back in this world, if we're filming for a TV documentary or we're filming for a film, or even if I'm on an expedition, like a science expedition, it's only science, it's only telly, it's only a movie. It's not worth dying for. And I'm quite happy just to bin it and walk away. And people get very, very upset. And it's understandable. But the priority is that myself and the people I work with go home at the end of the day. Right. And you hear that a lot, actually, from people, but it's often just, they're just covering their backs. But I genuinely mean, and I've called this, I was on a skydiving BBC shoot, and it was getting super windy. And the drop zone stopped all the parachuting, but the guy in charge of the drop zone said, look, if you want to go up and film, we'll put a plane up. It's entirely up to you. It's up to you whether you jump out or not. That's your call. And so the director's like, oh, it's great news. We can go. And I'm like, I'm not going. It's like, yeah, but we've been told we can go. It's like, no. He said he put a plane up if we were happy to go. And I'm not jumping in this. And obviously there's a lot of, well, if you don't do this, the shoot's over, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. I'll never work for you again. I won't get paid, but I'm going home. If I jump with a plane and this set of winds, chances are I'm getting hurt. So, it is what it is.
It's interesting at the elite levels of sport, performance, exploration. I feel like sometimes the perception is that these people are crazy. This Andy guy must be crazy because he's scuba diving down and working through crevices. And although there may be an element of more, like maybe there's disproportionately more fearlessness in your mindset than the average person, but it doesn't discredit how calculated elite performers are. Your ability to assess risk from a bird's eye perspective constantly, and then use your instincts coupled with that to make decisions in real time is not common. Like, you have a TV producer and that guy wants, hey, we can do it. Let's do it. This is great. We're going to get ratings. We're going to get the thing done. This is awesome. You want to go, right? You're the crazy guy. was like, no. I'm the most calculated person in the room, and that's a bad idea.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. This happens all the time. People will go, "Oh, you've got a death wish. You've got, you're mental, all this sort of stuff." And that's no. I'm the most paranoid and cautious person you'd like to meet.
Right.
And I can prove it because here's all the things I've done the last 25 years. If I had a death wish, I've given myself more than ample opportunity to kill myself. The paranoia keeps you alive, and it's again, harking back to what we said at the start about normality. The people I work with, world class skydivers or other exploratory cave divers, or the stunt performers I work with, the high end sort of stunt guys, we're all the same. Like, you won't find anybody who's reckless or flippant or gung ho because you can't really afford to be. And cave diving is probably one of the best examples of that. Cave diving is a very binary sport. So cave diving, if done properly, is incredibly safe. It genuinely is, because an underwater cave is actually a very predictable environment, very stable, predictable environment. And nothing usually changes that's like sudden. It's not like, suddenly a car comes out of nowhere or an avalanche. These things don't tend to happen in caves. They're fairly stable and predictable. People die because of things they did or did not do. But the thing about a cave, as safe as it is, it's not forgiving. It's a very binary environment. So I'm climbing or I'm skydiving and I have a bad day, then I can twist an ankle, break a leg, break my back, be in a coma, die. There's a kind of a stepping up of potential outcomes there from, minor to major. Whereas in caves, you're either 100% okay or you're probably dead. No one gets injured cave diving. You have a good day and you come out alive. You have a bad day, but you sort it out and come out alive. You have a bad day, don't sort it out and die. So that tends to focus the mind on all the little things. But and I think a lot of the training I actually did when I was doing bomb disposal in the forces, that it focuses your mind on doing very accurate risk assessments, like you say, looking at risk and taking the emotion out of it. Because a lot of people see risk and then they go, "Oh my God, this is really dangerous." Like, no. You've just gone with your heart, not your head, and you've missed the actual dangerous bit. And also realizing when you're not in danger. So recently I was in a cave diving project in France with a friend, and it was in like 6 hours underwater. But towards the end, he went off and went ahead, actually, because he'd less decompression than me. But anyway, I was following this passageway along, and I thought, I've gone the wrong way here. I'm a bit lost. This isn't great. Okay, this is problematic. But I found an air bell. And within the air bell, there was enough rocks to kind of a ledge to clamber out of the water.
What's an air barrel? Is like a cylinder with a pocket? No.
So an air bell. So basically a part of like in an underwater cave that you might get an air pocket. Yeah, you're right. Like a dry section, so you can actually surface. It's a lake, almost underground lake, so you can surface on the surface, and that's great. And in this was a little ledge, because I thought I'm running low on. Well, I was using a rebreather, which recycles one breath, and the sort of constraining factor in a rebreather is this thing called scrubber, which basically absorbs the carbon dioxide you breathe out. Mm-hmm. That's your limiting sort of resource. And I was like, I'm running low. I need to change this. So it was a 6 hour dive in, 3 hour dive out. So
6 hours?
Yeah, to get in. Yeah, 6 hours dive.
6 hours to get in.
Yeah. We planned on camping overnight. There's another airspace where you can get fully out of the water. We're going to camp in that airspace, change all our scrubbers.
Sorry to interrupt, but how do you know where?
Well, this cave, this is sort of shakeout with kit testing and sort of dive. So this was been dived before by a couple of British guys a few years ago. So we knew that the sort of the camping spot was there. But so I couldn't find it. So I was like, okay, actually, worst case scenario, I'm gonna plow on and try and find this, the camping spot and surface and that, and find my mate Chris. If I can't find him, it's fine, because I know he's okay. I'll go back to this ledge. I'll get out of the water. I'll rebuild my rebreather with a new scrubber unit in it, and I'll dive out. But as scary as it may seem, being lost in a cave, well, I wasn't quite lost. I couldn't find the right way on, but I knew where this air bell was. I knew where the way out was. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to die. That's important. Now,
listening to you tell this, like I actually have like a little bit of anxiety about being stuck in a cave. It's quite impressive.
But the thing is, you focus on, you're not stuck. Like it seems initially, sort of, I don't know, kind of emotionally, you see, oh my God, I'm stuck in a cave and I'm lost. Like, no, hang on. What's the worst case scenario here? The worst case scenario is I've got to climb out of the water in all this kit. I've got to repack my rebreather on a tiny ledge, massive pain in the backside, but doable. And then I've got to dive out today rather than camping overnight and diving out tomorrow. So the project's kind of over. It's all very embarrassing. But I'm not dead. That's the important thing. And much like with the movies and the TV and that, right? So, you'll never work for me again and you're not getting paid and all that sort of stuff. And like, okay, that's all bad, but I'm not dead. So focus on what the real problems are. And it's the same when I do, like, I genuinely sort of risk assessments on these sort of things. And you sit at home and you be as paranoid as possible and look at all the things that can possibly go wrong and go, okay, what are the important things? What are the things that are going to kill me? Cool. These are the things. Can I guarantee they're not going to happen? Can I put something in place to guarantee they won't happen? And chances are probably not. It's very hard to get guarantees on this. So what I do is I then go, okay, cool. So let's assume they're going to happen. Let's work on the basis these things are going to happen. What are my plan Bs, Cs, and Ds to make sure that when they happen, I'm good? And so with my rebreather, I've had the same rebreather for about 7 years now. It has never once broken down me, not once. But every time I get in the water, I assume that it will, so. And I carry bailout, backup, redundant sort of gas supplies for that.
Yeah, I listened to a presentation you did for TED where you talk about how not to die, and I thought that this was really interesting. You just touched on it again, but this knowing when you're not in danger is equally as important. And I think about this concept every single week in a grappling setting, because in jiu-jitsu, and I it's funny, like that we talk about tenure and like how long it takes to become an expert. And then even when you're an expert, you're really just a beginner amongst the other experts who have been there much longer. And in training, the instinct when you start to train is you panic when something goes wrong. You have your perception of what you think is going to happen. I'm going to go and, get my opponent. And then if they do something unexpected, you become on guard, heart rate goes up, you start to lose control of what you want to do, and you start defending and reacting to what they're doing to you. But as you develop proficiency, and the longer you do it, the more comfortable you get, and the better you can regulate your oxygen and manage your breathing, you start to learn when you're not in a bad position, despite if someone was looking at it, it would look really bad. So someone can have, maybe they have their hand, their arm around your neck, and they're starting to sink in for a choke, but you know that they're not under your chin. And so they can work as hard as they want, but they're not going to actually be able to cut off the oxygen supply. And it's in those moments that you learn to relax. And it's in the relaxation that you begin to be able to make decisions. And if you can make decisions under pressure, then you're safer a lot more times than you think you are. But it's taken me so long to see it that way. And I can only imagine in what you do, you have to constantly be recognizing that your life is not at risk until it is, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And and very seldom is it actually at risk. It looks from the outside like everything I do is massively high risk, but the key thing is to take these seemingly very dangerous things, and I suppose initially very dangerous things, and make them acceptably safe through planning, through make backup plans, through gaining the right skills, using the right equipment, and it's perception, it's perceived risk over actual risk. So the classic example is the skydive. I think I mentioned the TED talk where I compete at speed skydiving, which is the simplest form of skydiving in the world. You get out of a plane and basically go as fast as you can, the fastest person wins. So you're doing 280 miles an hour. Actually, the top guys, my mates, could do over 300 miles. I'm like 275, 280. I'm probably the slowest in the team. But anyway, so 280 miles an hour, head down towards the earth, it's incredibly loud, it's incredibly fast, all that sort of stuff. And it's, it would seem incredibly scary and then you come out the dive, you slow down, you pull your parachute opens, you're drifting in the wind, it's all peaceful and silent, and you feel quite safe. But the reality, and that's the perceived risk, is speed skydiving. Oh my God, mental, under a nice quiet canopy drifting towards the ground, super safe and chilled.
Right.
But the reality is the other way around. No one gets hurt in a speed skydive. You jump a plane on your own. There's nothing else in the sky to hit. You know, you can't really there's not really many problems that can happen in a speed skydive. It feels like loud and scary, but it's absolutely fine. The vast majority of actions, look at the USPA and the British and US Parachute Association's kind of instance reports for like the last 10 years globally, and almost all the problems happen under a good canopy. Things go wrong when they're trying to land. They land the wrong place, or they pull a low turn and they hit somebody else when they're coming into the landing area. So I always tell people this: the dangerous bit is after you've opened your canopy, but it doesn't feel dangerous. But you've got to think about these things with your head, not your heart.
Has that always been the way that you've assessed risk? That's a pretty unique. You seem very good at compartmentalizing the things that matter most, and maybe not concerning yourself with the parts that don't, despite maybe what the initial perception of someone who, like, I don't know, isn't involved in what you're doing. Because I think of that and I do exactly what you say. I go, wow, speed versus regular. Speed is faster is more risky. More people must perish doing speed skydiving than not. But of course, that's not the case.
No, not at all. I think, certainly when I first noticed, I'm not sure if this was, we were certainly trained in this, when we did bomb disposal and high risk search, then a lot of that is about doing accurate threat assessment. That's no point. That's, you can look at a problem and make deductions from it about what is required. The specific of what the device might be, who built it, or how is it going to be booby trapped or not, what all those sort of things. So by the time you have to approach that device, you almost know how it's going to go, or how you hope it's going to go. I suppose bomb disposal is a bit like cave diving. It's pretty binary. It's one,
you're fine until you're not.
Exactly. It's surprisingly a zen experience, believe it or not. Walking down the long walk towards the device is pretty peaceful, because the entire universe exists around this little bubble of you. Nothing else in the world that really matters or exists for that moment, or those 5 minutes to 1 hour, depending on how long you're down there for. But and with that absolute focus on the job right in front of you, and the simplicity of the universe, because of that, kind of brings its own peace. So, and with that focus comes the idea that you focus on what's actually important, because you're obviously very highly motivated to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. So you have to be able to go, right, what's actually important here? What actually matters? Forget about what feels bad or what feels good. Clinically, what matters? Although to come back to the earlier point about one of my mates once said, he goes, the thing about it is that as far as you're concerned, everything will always go okay, because the second it stops going okay, you're never going to know. So it's like, okay, as far as you can, but and that sort of moved on now to cave diving, to skydiving, to stunts. It's like, right, okay, let's look at this, not emotionally, but sort of cerebrally. That said, I'm not dismissing emotions, because there's still, fear is very important.
It's a big motivator.
Huge. And I think fear is a positive emotion. People are going, yes, fear's this bad and all this stuff. But I think fear is a very positive emotion. Fear is your friend. Fear doesn't care about your ego, and he doesn't care about, impressing your mates, and doesn't care about, looking cool on Instagram. His only motivation is to keep you alive. He cares more about you than anyone else. He's trying to keep you alive. The problem with fear, sometimes I call it the caveman, because it's that kind of mentality, that basic instinct, is that he doesn't understand, modern technology and engineering and physics and all that sort of stuff. So he doesn't understand how a rebreather works or how a parachute works. So when he's screaming out at you to not jump out of the plane, he's doing you a favor. He's looking after you. He's like, this is a terrible idea, which without a parachute it is a terrible idea. So you and actually I still use it now, even when I'm jumping up planes now, after 1,200 jumps, I still have a little bit of that in the back of my head because I don't want to lose that, because he's the one that makes me check. Do my safety checks before I get in the plane, do my safety checks on the plane, do my safety checks before I get out of the plane. He stops complacency. So you have to be able to listen to him, because sometimes he's right. Sometimes he's flagging something which you need to look at.
Totally.
But at the same time, you can acknowledge him and what he's trying to tell you, but he might be wrong. So in the case of skydiving, you feel a little bit of fear and you go, yep, I hear you screaming in my head to tell me not to jump in the plane because it's really dangerous. Yep, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. However, in this instance, you're wrong because I've got a parachute system I know how to use. It's going to be okay. So, I think if people kind of see fear as a useful tool and know when to sort of listen and when to acknowledge but then ignore, then that's part of the process.
That'd be a great TV show, is Andy and his Fear Caveman, an animated series. If you guys having conversations before you do these things, it is
him just screaming at me.
It is interesting how fear can be used. I like I said before, I think there's a lot of parallels in our life on obviously different levels, but I love fear. Fear is an extremely positive emotion for me in my life, because it is a compass in a lot of aspects, where when I do feel that resistance, like you, I calculate it to the best of my ability. If I'm surfing and I see a wave that's maybe a little bit bigger than I'm used to going for come out of the back, and I go, that's probably, I should probably duck dive under this. But then there's this part of you that goes, yeah, but if you go, that's where you're going to get better. Then the rest of the other waves will seem smaller. And if you make it, it's going to be pretty fun. And you get to manage that risk. But it's in those moments where I'm like, I feel that. And then I know that whatever that thing is, provided it's not in some extremely technical environment, that means I should do that. I should at least explore what this is within a certain margin. But it's managing that margin is a tough thing to do. And I remember this skiing, like when I was younger, when you're young and you're made of rubber and you can fall out of the sky and bounce and it doesn't matter. Yeah. There would be so many instances where, I'm up on the hill and I'm shouting to my friend, because we don't have cell phones yet, how does it look on the bottom? And they're like, I think you're going to be fine, and you just go for it and you send it. And that there's a lot of trust involved with fear too, whether you're trusting yourself, you're trusting your team, you're trusting all the preparation that you guys have done together, that allows you to navigate when and where you acknowledge it and shut it down, and when and where you acknowledge it and lean into it.
Yeah. Like, no one grows inside the comfort zone. Doesn't happen.
And a lot of people live there forever.
Yeah, but and you'll stay the same size the whole time. And the other thing I've learned is that the more you step outside your comfort zone, not only does that zone itself grow, but it becomes easier and easier to step outside the new boundary. Like, I have done so much training in my life, learning to do the hey-ho jump. Like, I've experienced being outside my comfort zone so many times that I'm kind of used to it now. So in the last few years, I've been doing a bit more stunts, and to get onto there's a thing called the British Stunt Register. So basically, it's like this stunt performers union in the UK, which isn't necessary to work in stunts, but it's an asset, and it's a sort of, it's nice credibility wise. But with I need to have a mix of skills. So my diving, climbing, skydiving, military stuff is great, but you need to have things like a martial art and something else. So I decided to go, all right, I'm going to learn Taekwondo. And then I'm also going to learn to ride a horse, like, really well. Having never ridden before, it's like, right, I'm going to go and do the British stunt riders test. More so with the riding than the martial arts, but there's a lot of discomfort there, a lot of frustration, a lot of time, anxious, unhappy, just, as you do when you're learning something new, not only does it feel a bit, especially the horse runs, like a bit, when you're jumping, it's a bit anxious, a bit scary, but also the frustration that comes with, not making progress and something's going backwards and all that stuff. But, with skydiving, with diving, with freediving, with the military stuff, I've been there now so many times. I recognize and go, okay, yeah, cool. This is this part of the graph. This is where I am here.
Right.
I just got to keep. And the only way for this to stop happening is either to give up or to keep going. Mm-hmm. So as I say, I think the more you step outside your comfort zone, it becomes easier and easier to step outside your comfort zone, and therefore your comfort zone grows at an exponential rate. But you have to accept those inverted commas negative emotions, things like nerves, anxiousness, anxiety, fear. It's just part of the process, but also part of the kind of the thrill, because it's the highs and lows, isn't it? Like if you stay inside your comfort zone the whole time, there'll be no real highs. You got to kind of take a few risks to get the rewards.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hear that all the time. You got to get outside of your comfort zone. It almost sounds cliche, but in the truest sense, there is so much. That's where the growth happens. That's where you learn who you are, or the difference between who you might be and who you thought you were.
Yeah,
and then it puts a lot of things into perspective in life. I feel like it's in those moments of most risk where you see how you can feather the gas pedal, and then when you come out on the other side of that, like you said, it's like with each time you become a little bit more accustomed to it. My question about this that I think about a lot too is there a downside to that exponential growth of this comfort zone? Because with your life, for example, even if you're prepared, the risk is high all the time.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues with it, actually. One, as you touched on there, is that to keep pushing the comfort zone further and further becomes a greater and greater risk, which I would argue that with that also comes greater and greater skill to deal with that risk, and therefore the end result risk is the same. The other thing is, frankly, it can get exhausting. Like, you can't be constantly, I've had a couple of years of all the extra training I've been doing. So kind of certainly this summer, I'm like, right, I'm just going to do the things I'm good at. I'm not going to learn anything new because you can't spend your entire life outside your comfort zone. Otherwise, it's just mentally and potentially physically exhausting. You need highs and lows and peaks and troughs. So I think that there's certainly problems with it. And the other major problem actually is that it becomes harder and harder from a point of view of effort to step outside your comfort zone. It becomes easier psychologically, but in the sense that, like an Olympic runner, if you run the 100 meters in 30 seconds, give me a week and I'll cut you to 20 seconds. You can, or weight loss. If you're 40% body fat, you can probably drop to 30% body fat in a month or less. I'm not sure.
Right.
But you try and go from 8% body fat to 7, and that could take 6 months. You try and go from 10 second 100 meters to 9.98, and that could take 4 years. So it's this it's sort of diminishing returns. So I'm finding now that
in Olympic weightlifting, we talk about this a lot because the difference between the world record holder and the next most competitive person sometimes is half a kilo, and it's half a kilo for years. Someone will set a record, and that record will stand by half a kilo, which is basically the weight of the rung on the end of the barbell that they clamp, and it'll hold for years and years. And people will be at the most elite level, and they will train and sleep and dissect their training and assess and constantly, and they can't get that. It's that last 0.5% of body fat that is just unattainable, because it takes so much effort mixed with perfection, mixed with athletic capability. It could be the humidity in the room doesn't allow the barbell to move at the speed that it needs to set the record. And so it's fascinating that despite that, you still have so much pursuit at that level, which I think is what's so fascinating about people like yourself, that you still have that fire no matter what to go for it.
Yeah, it just requires a lot more effort, to make that little graduated kind of increase. And even in cave diving exploration, it's getting harder and harder to find underwater cave systems that to explore that are kind of reasonable. Because now, the cave systems, you could be swimming like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kilometers, or 6 miles underwater, and have to swim the same back out. So that's like a 12-mile round trip. Spend 4 or 5 days underground and underwater, and dive to some incredible depths, like 200 plus meters deep. So to make progress in that, you just do more and more and more and more, which is fine. But again, it requires huge amounts more effort to make those small gains, like in any sport. Same with skydiving, speed skydiving. When I first started competing, I went from 140 to 220 in no time, and then 250, and then 280. And actually, I've not trained much over COVID, but to try and break 300, I'd have to probably take a year or two and just solidly train for that.
Do you find difficulty in I have trouble managing hobbies. I have to be very strict about what I allow myself to pursue and what I don't. And physical training has always been a prerequisite. I look at it as the thing that allows me to pursue these other things in my life that I love to do, like surfing and mountain biking, grappling, striking, all these kind of things. And having an able body is a really important part of being able to do those, to go express yourself in these areas. But I have a problem where, and I think this is how I ended up finding you, is I read Deep by James Nestor and was fascinated with freediving. Totally. I didn't even know that freediving existed to the level that it does, and the global community of people that do it competitively, and became enthralled. And through that discovered how wild some of these scuba diving expeditions are, and found you via cave diving. And of course, my natural inclination is, I got to start doing this. I need to find a course. I need to learn how to, free dive. I need to buy flippers. I'm going to start free diving here locally. And then I need to find a group of people that does it competitively so that I can get better. And then I want to get a little bit better than that and edge my way up. And then I need to find a circuit. And my head just goes like that with everything. It could be, I could read about motorcycle riding. I could read about bow hunting. And it's so hard to keep myself roped in, knowing that if I do that, if I take on more stuff constantly, it's diminishing returns, exactly like you said, because you take away from your ability to perfect the skills that you do have that you're pursuing on a day-to-day.
Yeah. I recognize that in myself. It's like, oh, that looks quite cool. Let's get amazingly good at that. I did Taekwondo, and just it's more for the start anyway, for the stunts, and then I started competing. You got the English and British championships, and the problem is that it's time. I do not have the time. So, and certainly you got a finite amount of time. People complain, oh, I'm not enough time. And that's rarely true, but physically, I can never maintain a decent level at more than 2 sports at once. Now, my diving, sort of cave diving, technical diving, rebreathers and deep stuff, is always up there. And because I've been doing this as long, I can take a while off that and still pretty much jump in and smash out some pretty decent stuff. Free diving, if I'm not doing a lot of free diving, that goes off because a lot of that is physiological. My ability to hold my breath and deal with high CO2 and low O2 and that sort of does diminish if I'm not training it. My climbing, I'm not climbing to the same level I was. I just can't get out and climb at that level enough to maintain my climbing abilities. And certainly when I was riding a lot for the stunt test, I wasn't doing anything else really. I wasn't doing a bit of martial arts, but I wasn't diving, I wasn't free diving, I wasn't climbing, I wasn't skydiving. I was just living on the back of a horse.
Getting really good at it.
But there is no way I'll probably be able to maintain, or certainly not improve, my level of riding, for example, because I cannot dedicate the time to it at the sacrifice of everything else. Because although I might do a bit of stunt riding for work, it's not my main thing. It's not my sponsors. Most of my work comes from that's from diving. So I have to kind of prioritize things. Go right. I need to maintain my skills in the cave diving, deep diving, technical diving side, and then try and maintain a reasonable level of free diving, and a sort of acceptable level really at martial arts climbing and riding, because I physically cannot maintain a high level in 5, 6, 7 different disciplines. It's physically and mentally impossible. Even if I had no kids and I didn't have to work all the money in the world, I still don't think.
Even then,
if you have to dedicate like one full day a week to each of those activities, I'm not sure that's it's just so that's one of the problems I think about stepping into your comfort zone. I was saying, and meeting on these new pursuits with a purpose, but it's not sustainable. You can't maintain. I don't know what you would call it, elite level.
It's self-efficacy. Like, you start to gain confidence and believe in yourself because you do move this threshold out further and further in different arenas. And with doing that, where someone else might go, oh, Taekwondo, that's going to hurt, or I could never figure that out. That's a lot of work. You're like, Taekwondo, are there local competitions? You jump the step of like, could I do it? Because you can. And you explained something really cool, which was your acceptance of the timeline. Like, that when you take something on, if it's new, there's going to be initial frustrations. But you already know that because you've broken through that wall with so many different activities in your life. You expect it. And on the flip side of that if you move beyond that to a certain amount, you're going to start to develop proficiency. And I don't think that most people are able to see over that wall to go, if I stick with this long enough, I'll get to a place of enjoyment. They just get hit with the frustration and throw their hands up.
Yeah, that's true. I think most people can't take the long view when it comes to fitness, when it comes to health, or when it comes to training. And training for anything, be it could be purely cerebral activity like training for a new skill, learning chess, learning a new language, or something more physical like martial arts or riding or whatever. Is you have to take the long-term view. You have to go right. And actually, sometimes it takes less time. Like with the riding, it's like, right, I'm in this for the next, 18 months. And actually, after 6 months, I was making some decent progress because I was just spending so much time. But, or like fitness, again, we said about this, like you want to be fit for summer? Cool. Plan on it being next summer.
Right.
the idea, but people struggle with the length of the journey. And I think sometimes I see a lot of people advising, right, forget about the destination, just focus on like enjoy going to the gym, forget about the end result, because what will happen is automatically you'll wake up one day and, my God, I'll look great and feel great, which is great. People struggle with that. There's a reason that all the gyms are jam packed in January, and they're all empty by March.
I think this is true for most new thing, like any new thing that someone takes on, because if you had a graph of every new activity, there's initial excitement spikes, right? Your high motivation, high belief that you can get it done, and you're excited about whatever the new thing is. You're buying new equipment because you know that you need gear for whatever the thing is that you're going to do. And then you hit that point where that stuff wears off. And now you're faced with the fact that you have to acquire the new skill, learn, you have to put in time, and then it dips. And then over time, the long view, like you're talking about, you start to see this improvement. And then at the end of that, you're in a small group of people that have weathered the storm, the ups and downs of motivation and excitement and despair and frustration. And I don't know, it's probably a lot like, a marriage or a relationship. It's in the beginning, the sparks are flying, everything's crazy. And then you become accustomed to being with each other, living together. A lot of people get divorced, break up during that time. And then you meet those couples that have been together their whole life. And it's really special because they're a unique group of people that have weathered all these storms. And now they get to experience having spent a lifetime with someone that knows them so well that they're almost the same person. It's really special.
That's an excellent analogy. It's a really good analogy. I like the fact that, that's absolutely true. When people train initially, it's like, this is new, this is exciting. And often the gains are quite high because, as we said before, it's like, it's really easy to make very rapid gains at the start of any sort of new skill or new sport, whatever. But then you hit the frustrating plateau, and often you plateau for a while or even go backwards, but you've got to ride that out to then start making more gains. But the gains you'll make on the far side of that are going to be much slower. They will be frustratingly much slower than what you made at the start.
Right.
But as you say, I think anyone who's been through that once, if not twice, knows that. So, you get, like you see, a weightlifter, that anybody who's a professional sportsman or who's taken on something like this and got good enough to at least be able to look back and go, okay, so that was that and that was that. And which means when you take on something new, like you do with riding, it's like, okay, this is brilliant. And then you hit the frustrating plateau, and it's still frustrating and it's still demoralizing, but you kind of go, okay, I know what this is. I recognize this. I know where I am. And I recognize this is part of the process. It's rubbish, but it is what it is. And it's always going to be here. There's no way of there's no way of avoiding it. I've found that everything I've done, that there's always that patch. In fact, to be honest, there's more than one patch where you just plateau out, and you put in the same amount of time, the same amount of effort, the same amount of dedication for zero gains. But it's like, if you want to follow the line along to the next upshoot, then you just have to ride out that plateau.
It's funny. I get the most readily available example is in striking. Like with boxing, mechanics are very specific, and I didn't really think about this much until I started doing it, of how calculated each movement that a boxer does. You think you're just watching two people punch each other in the face, but there's a lot of instinct and reaction that's baked into what they do when they're just training in pads or footwork or anything. And I was working with the coach the other day on just throwing a left hook, which is a very common strike that you'd see all the time. And there's a whole lower body pivot along your hip and your foot to match so that you're not throwing with your arm, but your whole body's putting power behind the movement. And I've been an athlete since I was 9 years old. I've been a trainer for 8 years, done every sport under the sun. And I love movement and learning and trying to figure things out with my body. And it was like my foot didn't belong to me. It was just so disconnected from everything I wanted to do. And I was watching on video, knowing exactly what I needed to do, talking to the coach exactly about what we should do, and then not being able to do it. And I'm like, this disconnect, it's so frustrating. It's almost like infuriating. But it's that part of it that's the excitement, that you're acquiring a skill, you're learning something new, and you are in that. You're in the process. You're in that unknown kind of whirlwind of chaos that doesn't make sense. And like you said, you can only connect those dots looking backwards. You have no idea where, I don't know, it's like cave diving. If you're exploring a new cave, you don't really know where it goes, right? But you have a line, and then you can look back and you know how you got there. It's quite profound.
The one thing I would I don't want to discourage anyone, but I've never been as good when I got somewhere as I thought I would be. So like, for example, in skydiving, I've got the various levels of license, and D license is over 1,000 jumps. And I remember thinking, there was an A license, so those guys I would take, but C license is like 200 jumps and above. And I was like, when I get the C license, that'll be amazing. And I got the C license. It was like, I'm not really very good still. I'm surprised. I thought I'd be amazing. So, okay, 500 jumps. And then, I got my D license, and somebody there's, well done. You've got your D license. You've got 1,000 jumps. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And yeah, you seem a bit like demoralized. I just thought I'd be like a sky god, skydiving ninja. And I'm not not that, and that's not me being humble. It's true. It's like, God, I thought I'd be absolutely brilliant when I got the 1,000 jumps, and I'm all right, but I'm nowhere near as good as I thought I would be. When I was an A license, I'd looking at the D guys with the D license, I thought they were like, oh my God, they just must be completely amazing. I was like, damn, yes, I've never been as good, as or
That's
not as good as I thought I would be.
I mean, you said Taekwondo, right? It's the same thing with the belt ascension. Like, you're a white belt and you look and like, wow, the blue belts are so intense. Those guys are masters of what they're doing. And then you get yours and you're like, I don't deserve this, like take it off. I need to thank you, but I'm not ready. But you do notice, or at least I feel like the moments where you do get perspective is when you are then around someone who's just doing their first jump. And you're like, whoa, okay.
Yes.
There's the vastness of like all the work that you've been doing, all the time you've been putting in. You don't notice when you're rubbing. It's like what you said at the beginning. You're within a cohort of people that are all doing the same type of wild activities. So your perspective of like, oh, I'm not really out there because everyone in my circle is like this. And then you get around someone who like, they're learning how to ride a bike for the first time at 35 or something. And you're like, oh.
That's true. And I find myself saying this in the skydiving community, find myself saying the same things that people said to me, years ago when I was like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. And, that doesn't work. And I'm sort of going, you want to do it like this? And they're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't, because I said the same thing to the person who said the same thing to me, 10 years ago. But yeah, that's actually a very good point that when I'm with people who are just starting out, beginners, be it in diving or free diving or whatever else, climbing, skydiving. Yeah, that's probably the time you go, oh, I'm not quite as bad as I thought I was. But I need to hang out with people who are
less
more
good.
Rubbish.
I'm curious. I know that a big part of free diving is your breathing, your capacity to regulate carbon dioxide and oxygen, and obviously the physical amount of time that you can hold your breath and stay calm under the pressure while you dive deeper or further or anything like that. How do you train or think about breathing when you are and aren't involved in frequent free diving?
So when I'm not free diving, I don't really give a huge amount of thought. There's definitely, free diving is certainly in the beginning is psychological. I've taken people from holding their breath for 20 seconds to 2 minutes plus on a weekend, and nothing changed physiologically within them. It was purely mentally. They both were able to relax whilst holding their breath, but also they came to appreciate that when your body starts telling you need to breathe, you don't. You've got minutes left. You don't need to panic. Just you get that sort of signals. It's unpleasant, but it's like, okay, it's fine. Body's telling me to breathe. Body's wrong. I've got minutes and minutes here. Everything's fine.
And that's really just carbon dioxide building up in the bloodstream, right? Is that sensation that most people think that the sensation to breathe is because I don't have enough oxygen. Really, it's not the case at all. It's that carbon dioxide's building in your bloodstream and creates that kind of panic, right? And so you're breaking through that.
All you're doing, all that in the sort of the spasm, all comes from high carbon dioxide, not low oxygen. You've got plenty of oxygen left, plenty. So clearly, the more relaxed you are, the less energy you're burning. So the less carbon dioxide you're generating and oxygen you're using. One of the ways. So I train sort of some of the more competitive elements of freediving, usually only when I'm on courses or running courses. I personally don't compete at freediving. I do freediving to go and see things like inside sea caves and shipwrecks and sharks and that sort of stuff. But one of the ways is with a thing called static apnea. It's one where you lie face down in a swimming pool, basically, and you're as still as you can, and you hold your breath for as long as you can.
Like 24 minutes, right? Or something. World record. It's insane.
I think that was on oxygen, the super saturated body with oxygen, which is really quite dangerous, to be honest. You shouldn't free dive on pure oxygen. There's a lot of risks. from doing that, because one of the main way you black out from in free diving is from a shallow water blackout from kind of low oxygen. And what happens, you black out, brought the surface, take a breath, and you're fine again. If you black out because you've been breathing high concentration of oxygen before a long breath hold, you can have real problems in that you can get your throat can basically lock up. So unless you are very close to, an action emergency, an ambulance, then there's very little that bystanders or even the rescue divers can do to help you. I know they've done it on some film sets, but presumably they must have some serious medical sort of professionals and equipment on site, because it's not a smart thing to do. But when I do the old later lie face down, you need to kind of take your mind elsewhere. Otherwise, you've got nothing else to think about but how uncomfortable you feel. And therefore you give up, not because you need to breathe, but because it's just unpleasant. It's a bit like running on a treadmill. I used to be able to go out and run for 12 miles, no problem at all. But I could never do more than 4 minutes on a treadmill.
I lose my mind.
It was just, it was painful. It was so painful. It was an absolute, a test of mental endurance to even do a couple of minutes.
I love it. The thing that you hate most of all things, the most scary, intimidating is a treadmill, stationary running.
God, it was just, you try and take your mind off or do something, and then you look back at the clock and 30 seconds had passed, and think, bloody hell, this is a purgatory. So in free diving, the same thing. They're holding your breath 4.5 minutes, which is 4.5 minutes isn't bad, but it's nowhere near some of the people I train with are all 6, 7, plus 8 minutes. But I tell myself little stories. So I go, or I picture myself coming home. So I walk down my road, and I take it in real time. And I make sure that I observe the trees and the leaves and the hedges and the fences, and I come through my gate, I open my gate, walk up my path, and go into the house. And everything's done in absolute detail, and it's all done in real time. As I sort of meander through this, almost a kind of, conscious.
You're talking about
state.
when your eyes are closed, right?
Yeah. So when you're face down, holding your breath, because that process and the focus on that. Somebody will tap you at 3 minutes. You're like, oh my God, it's been 3 minutes already. It's it kind of takes you out of. Is that me? Yeah, I think there's a helicopter flying over my house. Yeah, there we go.
It's so weird. This is tripping me out a little, Andy, because when I read this book, I started to do static breath holds in the morning, just here on my floor. I would just, because I was curious now. I was like, how long can I hold my breath? And I could hold my breath for 25 seconds. And then when I would go surfing, I would see how long can I hold my breath just sitting on my board with the act of balancing. And it was about 30 seconds. And so through reading James's second book, Breathe, and talking about, the fact that it's really just carbon dioxide building up in your bloodstream, and you actually have this buffer zone. And if you can get through that desire to breathe, you can make it much longer. I never actually read this anywhere. It's fascinating that you talk about this walk home, because when I went for a long time, it was about a minute. So I'd get to a minute comfortably, and a minute and 5 would be really uncomfortable. And then I started to think of different ways that I could get through that, because I was always paying attention to the sensation of thinking I needed to breathe. And so I started to close my eyes, and I would just sit there with my eyes closed, and that was pretty miserable, because now I'm taking away a sense and I'm just paying attention to the rest of it. But then randomly, one day, I was like, all right, I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to go downstairs and get my surfboard. I'm going to put my surfboard in the car. I'm going to get in my car, but I'm going to do this all real. Everything I do, I'm going to do it as if I was actually doing that, because I figured to walk downstairs and get my board and load it, it's probably a minute and a half. I knew it was longer than the time that I could get to, basically. And so I started to do this. And one, it's just an exercise in visualization. It's hard to actually walk through what you would really do without tripping yourself up. And then one day, I made it to the surfboard shed. I got my surfboards. I got them to the car. And then I was stuck at my car for weeks. And then one day I got in my car, I drove down the driveway, and I was driving, and all of a sudden I was at the beach, and I was like, what's going on? I looked, and it was 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And I had jumped almost doubled the time by doing this visualization exercise. Why does that have an effect? Like, what is it about doing that changes that process?
It's probably twofold. I mean, certainly, first of all, the more you hold your breath, the better you get it. It's like any of the muscle, which is why I said before, when I'm not being free diving a lot, my breath hold times go down, because physiologically you do improve your ability to deal with high concentrations of CO2. But I think in this instance, it's twofold. So one is the visualization is keeping you calm. You're not focusing on the kind of, inverted commas, the pain of holding your breath. So your heart rate's down. Your sort of your system is just sort of is passive, especially because you're visualizing something that you enjoy. That is kind of I would imagine surfing or going surfing is something that gives you a bit of peace and a bit of like relax, unwinds you. If you've been a hard day, that's something you go and do. So again, psychologically. So there's two things. So it's taking your mind off the sort of the focus, taking your mind's focus away from the kind of horrible sensation of having to hold your breath. So therefore, you can sustain how long you do not give in to that sort of mental desire, and then physically, it's probably allowing your body to kind of be a bit less stressed. And therefore you're relaxing, your heartbeat's dropping, and therefore you're physically using less oxygen and creating more carbon dioxide. So I think it's a twofold. It's a psychological and a physiological improvement.
When you're cave diving, are you conscious of your breathing?
Sometimes. It depends. When you're using scuba gear, more so, because clearly it's an open circuit scuba. So I take a breath from my scuba cylinder, my tank at the back. When I exhale, it gets exhaled as bubbles into the ocean, into the cave, the river, whatever it is, and they're lost. So you become a bit more aware of taking very, very deep breaths. But for a rebreather, you're recycling one breath, so it's kind of immaterial. So every now and again, I'll get the urge to take a nice, deep, satisfying breath, but I'm probably less aware of it on a rebreather than I am diving on scuba, to be honest, because your breath is the constraining factor on scuba gear, because it's the air that you're breathing is the limiting factor. That's your finite resource.
Right.
Whereas with a rebreather, I mean, we were on those rebreathers in France for 6 hours. So
that's actually you're saying in real time, it's converting your carbon dioxide back into oxygen so that you can run a open circuit.
So open circuit scuba gear, it's open in the fact that when you breathe in, you breathe air from the scuba cylinder, and then it's open. So when you exhale, your bubbles disappear into the sea, right? They're gone.
I meant the other, right? Closed circuit would be the
closed circuit. Yeah. So a rebreather is what they're called CCR, closed circuit rebreathers. It's the exact same design as what astronauts use on EVAs on spacewalks. Only theirs are pure oxygen. Because they can breathe pure oxygen in a vacuum, whereas divers can't breathe pure oxygen deeper than 6 meters. Otherwise, you get oxygen toxicity, basically causes you a fit and then you'll drown. But and obviously, I was a bit more robust because we've got to them in caves. So I was made of steel rather than sort of lightweight material they've got. But yes, effectively, what it does is you exhale and it goes round the tube into a container that's full of this stuff that looks like cat litter, to be honest, but it's called softener lime. It's a scrubber. So what it does, it absorbs the small amounts of CO2 in your breath, and then once that's done, you'll then you've got a bottle of O2 that might inject tiny amounts of oxygen back into that breath, just to compensate for the oxygen that your body's metabolized, which is fraction that's tiny, and then that breath returns, and you just kind of, as long as you don't go any deeper or shallower, that breath can recycle until your scrubber becomes sort of saturated in CO2.
So is the idea then in a cave that once you're in the cave, assuming it's a relatively level trajectory, you tank down to the cave and then you rebreathe during your traverse?
No, you can use the rebreathe the whole time.
Okay.
As you descend, you will have to put a little bit of gas from a tank into we call the loop, into that loop, because as the pressure increases, you need more gas to kind of fill your lungs. But then once you're at that depth, then yes, that volume, that gas, you've got a thing called a counter lung. Basically, effectively it's a plastic bag in your rebreather. You breathe into that, so you exhale, it goes into the plastic bag, and then goes through the scrubber, goes into another plastic bag, and then you breathe from that second plastic bag back in. It's just, I mean, a rebreather, as I say, it's like space technology, and it sounds really like, but what it is effectively, it's a couple of hoses, a couple of plastic bags, and stuff that looks like cat litter. That's pretty much all it is.
Will your life be fulfilled if you don't experience space?
Yeah, I mean, I've always fancied, because it's kind of, it's that last big challenge, but I don't think it's ever really been a reality.
Yeah.
I think that for my kids, there's potential that they might get to space. It's a bit like, it was never really real. It's not that disappointed. I've had a few goes at it, and I've still got irons in the fire, but I think there's some dreams that are so ridiculously kind of dreamlike that the fact they don't happen, it's like, I'll never be, a rock star playing Madison Square Gardens to, 50,000 people. That's just not going to happen. So the fact that doesn't happen to me doesn't really bother me.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, if I was given the offer, I did an outdoor sort of adventure show thing, like festival. There was a panel of various adventures, and one of the questions was, if money was no expense, what sort of adventure would you do? And I was last in the panel. Everyone else gave very, very nice answers. Oh, well, I'd get all my friends and family together and I'd take them on an adventure, or I'd take a load of orphans. And it's all these like really, very PC, very nice answers. They got to me and I went, so money's no expense? And they went, yeah. I went, all right, I'll go to Mars.
100%.
And everyone laughed. I was like, actually, no, because this was a few years ago when scientists thought they may have discovered water in a cave on Mars. And I said that's like, so actually, no, I'll go cave diving on Mars. There we go. That's what I'll do. And, so I feel a bit bad. All the rest of you said, all the rest of my people on stage with me have given these amazing answers. But no, I'm going to spend all your money on going cave diving on Mars. There we go.
I think it's fascinating how much our species is curious about exploration. You'd think that we're just content living this wonderful life on this amazing planet, but the unknown is so enticing.
Yeah, I think it's an intrinsic part of human nature, and I think the problem we've got is that our lives become too comfortable, and it's very easy to not move when things are coming. You've got hot and cold running water, food pretty much on supply. Like I said, I wouldn't say in the West, but in a lot of people in the West. There are obviously some people in the West, living in poverty, but a great deal of us, we've got a roof over our heads, we've got heating, we've got a bed, we've got shelter, food and water. It's the basic human needs are met. Whereas in a natural environment, we didn't have that. You had to be out hunting and gathering and avoiding predators on a daily basis, and resources have always been scarce, and therefore human beings, the animal that is human beings, became very good at adapting, exploring and spreading out, which is why starting in Central Africa, it didn't take us very long to basically cover the globe. Even when we got to places like Northern Europe, and the winters are Scotland, Jesus Christ, who the hell would move from kind of Africa or even from the southern Mediterranean to Scotland? But we did, because it's like, well, there's new resources there. There's new we can get. There's no competition. There's for whatever reasons less predators. So I think actually, although we may see it less and less in humans in kind of Western societies, or actually maybe global societies, but in a natural state, I believe it's intrinsic with humans to wonder what is over the next hill, what's around the next corner, what's just out there beyond the horizon. The seafarers of like the Polynesia guys, or even the Phoenicians, and doing these epic trips across the Pacific.
It's fascinating.
And you're like, Jesus, you can see maybe 20 miles to the horizon, and you guys were going hundreds out into the open ocean, and you could not have known what was there. So
it's crazy to think about that. My grandfather built a wooden boat in their backyard in Connecticut in Noank, and my dad, my uncle, my grandmother, grandfather, and my aunt sailed around the world for 10 years. They went all through like the Azores, American Samoa, and they planned a 2-year trip, but they did it, and they lived places, and it took them 10 years. And they did that with like a sextant and like, archaic navigation. Archaic at the time, It was advanced navigation, but relative to what we have today, I mean, I could probably, take a couple lessons and start to use my phone for GPS going places. But that blows my mind. A family of 5 and a dog in a schooner going around the world with, it's like when you would go on a road trip and you have an atlas. And you're like driving with the atlas on your lap, and you're looking up at the signs to make sure you go to the right place.
Oh God, yeah.
It's mind. I mean, I really do. I equate that type of exploration when they look out on the horizon. They go, "Let's find it out." I think that's what I find so scary about cave diving is the claustrophobia of it for me personally. But how you have no idea. If you're truly exploring, right, for the first time, you're the first guy there. You don't know. You've never been.
Yeah, I think I'm far more in awe of those early mariners than I am of cave divers, because we can always turn around and go back. You know what I mean? You're right. We don't maybe know what's ahead, but we also know what's behind us. But I think it's far more... and actually, we plan on that. Like, most time when you cave dive in, you're planning to cave dive back out again. You don't think that it's going to surface, in a cave that will then lead to the surface. So it's not a one-way trip. We're planning on a 2-way trip. We're planning on diving in and diving out, There are caves where you can dive in and surface into the forest somewhere else, but they're actually pretty rare. There are a few more in Mexico, but in there's 1 or 2 in France, but they're actually pretty rare. But those first mariners, who sailed off from wherever into the Pacific, hundreds and hundreds of... and things, it wasn't like, they did a day, went, can't see anything, let's go back. They'd be sailing for weeks in the middle of the Pacific, and you're like, having no clue what's out there. As far as they're concerned, the Pacific could have gone on for years. Like, they could have gone for millions of miles. They had no idea. And at that point, you just sort of think, you guys mental. What were you thinking?
I mean, I guess you're right. That truly is the mental. It actually, if you think about it, those explorers, those early mariners, will be the last truly blind explorers, because even when, as you expand outside, our solar system and begin to populate other planets or try to find another sun eventually, which 500 million years from now we'll have to do, that will be such a calculated venture. It will be nuanced, and there will be factors that you can't foresee, but you don't put that many people on a spaceship with a calculated trajectory unless you have a pretty damn good idea exactly where you're going to land, whereas these guys really rolled the dice across the table.
When we went to the moon, and we inevitably go to Mars, the key thing is we know it's there. We could see it.
Yes.
But there's the first mariners back in, would it be the Mesolithic, Paleolithic, who first sailed to, say, Polynesia or Micronesia. No one told them it was there. I'm thinking, what did you think was out there? Did you just go, we'll just have a crap. We'll just keep sailing to a hit land. How far's land? Don't know. Could be 1 million miles. I just thinking, Jesus, guys, that you've either got, you know, massive balls or you're just insane. But that, you know, I always think of that like you had absolutely no idea it was there, and it could have gone on because they did no appreciate the size of the world. Like literally, our world could be the size of like, I don't know, Jupiter, and
Right.
literally it could have been the nearest bit of land could have been, you know, 10 years of sailing away, and you're like, well,
That part is really interesting because it was our planet is just big enough to keep the other horizon, like the other land, away from you, but also just small enough that with primitive travel supplies and craftsmanship, you could actually get a wooden boat from Europe to the United States.
yeah.
It just it happened to happen that way, that you could construct that. Yeah, what if it was 10 times as far? What if it was a 8-year voyage?
Oh, if we did the same land mass but on a planet like Jupiter, yeah. So obviously the sea would be, to sail from Europe to America would I don't know, it would take years and years.
I think back, I was in Spain and we went to the castle of Ferdinand and Isabella where they sent off Christopher Columbus.
Oh, yeah.
And I was thinking to myself there, I was like, man, would I get in the boat? You know, what kind of person would I be in that moment, with thinking of what I think about my current mentality and how I pursue life? Would I be someone that was like, well, I think you're going to fall off the edge? Or would I say, yeah, let's go, let's send it, let's do it? It's really hard to think about what you would do and how truly mental these guys were that did that.
Well, I think in his day, they had a slight advantage in that they knew there was land out there somewhere, and they knew how big the Earth was. But like the Paleolithic guys, like the early mariners, you know, in their breed boats and that stuff, say that to Polynesia and Micronesia in the middle of the Pacific, they had no idea how big the world was. They had no idea of anything. At least, you know, Christopher Columbus's day, they went, right, eventually we'll hit land. We don't know how long it's going to take, but, you know, it might take a year or two, but there is definitely land. If we sail in that direction, eventually we'll hit land if we're not dead. I mean, I'm still, you know, I'm not trying to take away from anything from the achievements or the bravery, but and also, like, we've got a rough idea how big the world is,
right?
So we know roughly how far the land might be. But yeah, the early guys, even like the Aborigines of Australia, I think they initially came through Indonesia, I believe, when the sort of the migrations of but Indonesia to Australia, still a long way, you know.
Yeah.
And the thing is, they didn't know how far long it was. They just went, right, I'm going to get a boat and I'm going to sail in that direction. And do what until I hit land? Is land out there? I don't really know. Well, hang on a minute. So I do wonder what drove them.
I feel like you touched on a little bit. It's that intrinsic human characteristic of curiosity, and not everyone has it, but I feel like a large portion of people do. Do you find inspiration in those stories and those groups of people?
Yeah, stories definitely. I've been asked about you know, who's your idol or who do you look up to and that stuff. And I think in the early days when I was giving interviews, I should say Jacques Cousteau or something like that, because I felt I had to give an answer. Mm. But the reality is there wasn't really anyone like a role model. I didn't have any role models because I was less interested in people, but I was inspired by the stories they had or the things they'd done rather than the person themselves.
Yes. And
looking back now, and I said again, sometimes when I give talks at schools, you know, we should be very careful about kind of putting people on a pedestal, because no one's perfect and everyone is flawed. But that shouldn't take away from their achievements. So, for example, you know, but if you're inspired by a story or an achievement of a person, that is great. Don't be inspired by the person themselves, because they'll probably disappoint you because they're not perfect, and nor should they be, because no one is. But if you get inspired by the person and then find out their flaws, then you will somehow turn off to the stories, achievements they actually did. So, I'm more inclined to you know, I was never really inspired by Jacques Cousteau, the man, but I was inspired by some of the things he did, like some of the cool stories that he did. So, you know, but more so the old ancient stories of like the people, even just the people migrating out of Africa. I mean, out of Africa into North Africa, then into Southern Mediterranean. Okay, I get that, but then like Southern Mediterranean up towards like, you know, Sweden and Scotland. I think, what are you thinking? It's you know, it's freezing cold here, and you know, you've got whales of furs, and it's just food scarce. Like, why would you do that?
Why
so,
here?
why would you leave, you know, the south coast of France to migrate to, you know, Aberdeen in the north of Scotland?
You just read Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely, when I think about these questions of like, what was this driving force? What brought people out of Africa and the north into Europe and expanded? What brought people from Indonesia to Australia? And I think sometimes when I think about as if it's an individual person doing that, but the group think is a really big part of that. I feel like you're kind of collectively moving as a people too.
Yeah.
And finding your groups and moving along as a unit. And I feel like now, you know, in society, we've definitely become more individualistic in our pursuits, but you can still identify with a larger group of people that might align with the way that you think. Yeah,
I think as human beings, we're so kind of from a biological evolutionary point of view, we are a tribal or a herd kind of animal, in the sense that we're used to being in small, relatively small groups, you know, up to say 70 individuals, and that's sort of all primates kind of exist like that. I don't think we're particularly well designed to live in you know, cities and that sort of stuff. But even within cities, like in London, you find that London isn't a city. London is a collection of small villages. Right. It's all joined together, really.
With really good Indian food.
With really good food, yes,
really good.
Yeah. But you need a connection. You need people to understand you. So Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe, I think it's got a larger message. I think it started originally as you know, looking at why more soldiers are suffering from PTSD from recent conflicts than from, say, World War II, which is obviously a much bigger affair. And it was, or why, you know, some of the Native American tribes who are constantly at war, again, PTSD just wasn't really a thing. And it's because the community, so you've got a group of people around you who understand what you're going through and what you've gone through. But even once you come home, so in the case of Native Americans, the sort of people, the women and the elders and the children who weren't maybe out fighting, they were still directly affected by that and could see what was happening. So you didn't have to explain yourself. People understood what was happening. And in the UK, after people come back from World War II, you know, it was on the doorstep. They were suffering from the Blitz, being bombed, like London was being bombed, etc. So again, people kind of knew well what was going on. It wasn't an abstract thing. Where people come back now from Iraq and Afghanistan, they're going back to sort of civilian life, and no one around them gets it. And I think the individual is very aware that no one understands it. It's why, and it has happened. It has happened. But my personal experience, I know a lot of guys with PTSD, but I don't know a single person who suffered PTSD while on operations. Right. They all started suffering it when they got back, because I think on operations, there's that sense of there's a tribal community. There's people around you who have got your back.
Right.
That understand. That understand what you're going through, and are going through it with you. Right. And there's a certain clarity with that. Even if you don't like the person stood next to you, you understand them because they're trained to the same level as you, and they'll do what needs to be done, and they'll have your back regardless. So, yeah, I think we are And people, and I can see that even now, in the world is becoming somewhat a disparate place, and the internet's becoming a lot more personal. Even though on the internet, and things like podcasts are building communities, and these the sort of podcasts or the Twitch channels or whatever it is nowadays that are or the social media accounts. Some for better, some for worse, but the successful ones are building a community rather than just pure entertainment.
Yeah, there's something innate about that too. Like my experience from having done this is it's hard to describe. It feels very organic in a good way to be able to connect and talk. Like I've never met you before, right? It's by way of social media. Yet we can sit, when was the last time you sat for an hour and 40 minutes and had just a straight up conversation with someone? It's not that common these days to do that. And it's special. It feels wonderful to talk to another human about being a human and to be here. And it's especially following in the wake of COVID and the isolation, and you really notice like how valuable those kind of things are to be able to build community and talk to people that you understand or kind of get that maybe aren't in your immediate community. And now we're able to do that in different ways.
It's funny, you used to call it the campfire. You light a campfire and people just migrate to it. They'll sit around, and it's not just the warmth and the light. It's almost like there's a reason that the old Neolithic houses were designed around a central hearth, or even later ones you've got the big hearth as a semicircle. But people sit around campfires and talk. And I've done it on expeditions, and it's like, right, light a fire. And you light a fire, and within minutes, everyone's sat around and just talking, and I think, this has been something that's been going on for tens of thousands of years. Yeah. Light a small fire, everyone sits around it and starts talking.
Well, we need to light more fires, and this is the technological fire of the 21st century. So, Andy, it's been such a pleasure having you on here. I feel like with most guests, there's still so much, I have written here that I wanted to talk about that we didn't even get to. So I'm sure that in the future we'll have to do this.
Part 2, definitely.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.